I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. Today we're thinking about how From Software could have cooked a bit more as we discuss the worst gimmick boss from each Soulsborne game. If you're curious about the opposite of that, the best gimmick boss from each game, I did a video on that very topic last week. Check the link at the top of the description to see more. From Software are masters of their craft, and they've made some brilliant fights over the years, and this is because they keep experimenting, trying new things, never staying in one lane. But for every good experimental fight, there are those gimmick battles lurking in the background like a tortured, failed amalgamation. Which ones will we talk about today, I wonder? Without further ado, the worst gimmick bosses in each Soulsborne game, ranked. Let me know your least favorite gimmick bosses in the comments. Demon's Souls set the blueprint for what the Soulsborne series would eventually become, and that includes a lot of trial and error when it comes to the boss fights. The highs are really high, but the lows are, well, awful. It comes to two boss fights for me, and they both happen to be my least favorite in the game for good measure. My runner-up is the Adjudicator, which I feel is the worst fight in Demon's Souls, but the gimmick does function. You can only damage the bird atop the creature's head, and you can either do this by shooting the bird from afar with arrows, or by hopping down and attacking the wound on the boss's stomach to make him keel over. It works. I can't really say the same about the Dragon God. I think stealth is a mechanic that From Software is still trying to adapt to their games in a meaningful way, and they only really succeeded with Sekiro. I always think of the End from Metal Gear Solid 3 and wonder what a battle like that could be like if developed by FromSoft. But I sincerely hope it's not like the Dragon God, because oh my god, getting one-shot punched by an archdemon after fighting your way past the Flame Lurker is not a good feeling. You have to make your way to two different ballistas within the arena, but you have to do so without being seen. If you're spotted, you have a brief window to re-enter stealth, or you will die. On the way, you have to break open barricades of rubble, keep an eye on the boss, and once the ballistas are fired, attack its weak point to win the day. The gimmick itself doesn't work with the type of game Demon's Souls is trying to be, but beyond that, it also doesn't feel satisfying to defeat the Dragon God in this way. Hard compare this to the Storm King Archdemon in the same game, and how you get a fancy new sword that's whole purpose is for slaying the boss. Well, here, you're forced into hiding and praying you don't get caught. It's just so unsatisfying, and a real letdown when the Dragon God will likely be the first archdemon many encounter in the game. When it comes to Dark Souls, there's only one fight that could possibly be nominated for this spot. It's the Bed of Chaos. The Witch of Izalith, being such a prominent figure as one of the four lords, ended up being turned into a platforming puzzle. That's not what anybody played Dark Souls for. Now, we all know the development of Dark Souls 1 was rushed towards the end. The first half of the game got all the care, and the second half was practically pushed out of the door without regard for the development team or their vision. And the Izalith route easily suffered the most. Reused enemies, copy-pasted enemies, linear level design, and then the boss. In the Bed of Chaos, there are two weak points to the left and right of the arena that you need to hit. Whichever you attack, the floor will begin to crumble in set areas, forcing the player to precariously navigate the boss arena while avoiding the many swipes of the bed. And one wrong move will send you tumbling down a hole to your doom. Luckily, the boss fight saves your progress, so once you've destroyed one weak point, it's gone for good, but getting to the second weak point is an experience when the floor only crumbles when you're within breathing room of it. It makes it so that first-time players have no choice but to trial and error their way through the fight. And once both weak points are destroyed, the floor to the center of the boss crumbles, revealing a route you can jump to, allowing you to get to the Chaos Bug controlling the boss. This jump is hell to learn the timing for. I may be a master of it now, but that's only because of the 100 times I've died trying to jump, only to get swatted by a branch midair, or just roll off the route entirely after I land. And let's not even mention that the boss can just firestorm you to death if you take too long after surviving that hard jump. It's just a badly designed fight, and I don't begrudge anybody who dropped the game because of it, because I get it. Despite the immense size of its boss roster, I don't think Dark Souls 2 has many fights that rely solely on a single gimmick. Many of the bosses have decent movesets, so they don't need to rely on gimmicks to get the job done. I had to think really hard, and the only boss I realistically feel I can place on this list is the Royal Rat Vanguard. Found in the Grave of Saints, this is a survival boss, where the goal is to kill as many rats as possible who'll spawn in endlessly. They can inflict status effects and are generally a danger to the player, but if you want to win the fight, you've got to squish them all, because at a certain point, a rat with a rather stunning mohawk will spawn near the entrance to the arena, and this rat is the one that needs to be damaged. If you're able to kill it, the rest of the rats flee and you win the fight. The gimmick itself of killing enemies until the real boss spawns in itself isn't a bad gimmick. In fact, my favorite gimmick fight from Dark Souls 2, the Burnt Ivory King, uses the exact same premise to a larger scale. But it's made or broken by the enemies you end up fighting, and on the list of irritating enemies on Soulsborne, it goes Soulsborne dogs, and then Soulsborne rats are right after. They swarm, are unpredictable, tedious to fight, and combined with an arena that has a lot of statues your weapons can bonk off of, look, you can see my frustration. Especially when those rats can apply petrification, which is an instant kill if the status is applied. Defeating Senor Mohawk feels good, but only because the fight is over and I get to forget it exists until my next DS2 replay. If I can just take a moment of your time, I'm trying to reach 10,000 subscribers by the end of 2023, and now I'm back from summer break, I know we can do it. Look at how many of you aren't subscribed. So be sure to parry that subscribe button for more gaming countdowns every Wednesday and Saturday. Back to the video. Bloodborne only has a few gimmick bosses in its lineup, and none of them blow me away. Rom the Vacuous Spider has the gimmick of being able to summon hordes of spiders to protect her from damage each time she teleports, which can be incredibly tedious to fight through for new players, or those who just don't have a weapon with good damage output. However, Rom has a gorgeous arena, music, and once you have a strategy, she can be taken out relatively easily on future playthroughs. No, my least favorite gimmick fight is also my least favorite fight in the entire game, and if you just stay quiet, you might be able to hear it on the wind. Mikolash, Host of the Nightmare, is one of my least favorite fights in Soulsborne, and the worst gimmick fight in Bloodborne. His mechanic is simple, he'll run away from the player, and you have to lead him so that he runs into a dead-end room where you can then start the actual fight. In his first phase, this is incredibly simple, and his attacks are fairly standard for a magic user, so you're not in much danger unless you take an Augur of Ebrietas to the face. No, it's when you get him to half health and he fake unalives that really grinds my gears. You have to run down a large hallway, up a large staircase, and then proceed to chase Mikolash through an entirely new series of set pieces, and he has the nerve to then slam a gate in your face if you do it the normal way.
Nope.
All the while, he's forcing you to listen to his Great Ones podcast and moaning into your ear as he does it. The cherry on top, he gains the ability to cast a Call Beyond, which summons a Nova containing various arcane projectiles that blast out around him, and this attack has one-shot potential, and he loves spamming it. So if you die, you're forced to repeat the entire boss fight all over again, the full chase all over again. It's a shame because I do like the idea of a boss you can chase through a larger area to reach the boss arena, but like the Bed of Chaos, your progress should have been saved. Had we not been forced to repeat the first half of the battle every single time we died, Mikolash could have been just a little more bearable. As it stands though, he feels like a waste of time and a drain of my energy. It's always embarrassing when your boss fight's gimmick is outshined by another boss in the same game. Now I wonder which side of the argument all of you will fall on. For me, High Lord Wolnir has a fun gimmick where you have to destroy the 3 rings of power on his arms to defeat him in battle. and by comparison, the curse-rotted Greatwood has a copious amount of egg sacs you have to destroy to defeat him in battle, and for some reason, it just feels tedious and disgusting. The Greatwood starts off innocent enough in a large arena filled with hollows where you can run around it and destroy any eggs you happen to reach, but sometimes the boss will tilt in a way that stops you from getting to the weak spot you want, which can be frustrating when you don't have any other options for damage. Once the floor breaks and you hit the second phase, the Greatwood gains a gigantic hand, and there are more weak spots on its legs you can attack for good damage. It's not a terribly designed fight, not in comparison to some of the other battles in this video. I just find it extremely boring and unmemorable. There's only so much enjoyment I can get out of running around a boss trying to spot weak spots, and hoping I got there in the cycle to hit them before they go out of reach. The curse-rotted Greatwood is just a tree with pelotas, and commits the sin of being unskippable for most players because you get the transposing kiln needed to transpose boss souls by defeating it. And worst of all, I just have no chance of dying to this guy. At least with High Lord Vapnir, he has the chance of killing me, and thus giving me an interesting challenge. I'm more likely to die to the enemies in the room in Phase 1 than I am to the Greatwood itself, and for me that really is just a big pet peeve. Talking about Sekiro when it comes to worst gimmick bosses is sort of a catch-22 because, well, there are no bad gimmick bosses. Mini-bosses maybe, but we're not here to talk about those, and of the main bosses, the folding screen monkeys are the one true gimmick boss to fight, and they're not even that bad, but they kind of end up on this list by default. Your goal is to kill all 4 of the monkeys to complete the fight, but each monkey has a different gimmick, such as the invisible monkey that follows you from the start, or the monkey with great eyesight that you need to sneak up on to defeat. They rely on their senses to avoid Wolf's advances, and while your first time through fighting these guys legit and completing all the puzzles to lure them into their respective graves is fun, on repeat playthroughs it does turn into just chase the monkeys until you catch one off guard. With how finicky the monkey AI can be, you're often stuck in the folding screen boss for way longer than anyone would like. I'm less hesitant to call it a boss and more likely to call it a level instead, as that's more accurate to what you're experiencing. Do you go with the gimmick and beat the monkeys at their own game, or do you chase the monkeys around until you catch them, all the while risking that one of the monkeys could just jump into the void, forcing you to ring a bell to reset the area and respawn them? It highlights Sekiro's stealth mechanics, but just doesn't quite hit the mark, especially when all people want to do in this game is get involved in fun rhythm-based action combat. So of course the fight that's the antithesis to that design would ultimately end up on this list. Rounding the video off, we're at Elden Ring, and of the main bosses in the game, there aren't really any bad gimmicks at play. Most of the fights are played very straight, with little to no gimmicks to speak of. Radahn is amazing, Rykard is amazing, Mohg is amazing, and because I don't want to open the floodgates to field bosses and lesser dungeon bosses just yet, let's pick the one exception of a boss. The Godskin duo is not only the worst boss in Elden Ring, but also one of the worst gimmick bosses in Elden Ring, with the most offensive gimmick I've seen as a Soulsborne fan, and ironically it's pretty simple. Both bosses are tied to a single health bar, and for as long as there's health on the boss bar, they can respawn endlessly. Instead of just giving both enemies 2 separate health bars and saying, kill them, the game instead asks you to kill them both multiple times, despite the fact that their movesets fail to gel together due to the Godskin duo both having extremely fast and aggressive playstyles. Unlike Ornstein and Smo, where the movesets they used complemented each other's mechanics, the Godskin duo's attacks often overlap in a way that makes them hard to handle. You have to separate the pair from each other using the environment, or just out-DPS them and pray you don't get killed before taking one down. On my first playthrough, I was miserable with this fight, and also upset because I find the Godskin Apostle to be one of my favorite solo bosses. This was like desecrating his corpse and tarnishing my memories. At least in my footage playthrough, I did win on my first attempt, but that doesn't mean this fight is any less bullshit for new players. I won because I farmed every single dungeon and boss fight up to this point in the game. Most people aren't going to go that far, so their stats will likely be a bit weaker than mine. And in that case, the 2 to 3 shot potential of the duo is undeniable. Having a boss where you kill enemies until a health bar drops to 0 is possible, the living failures from Bloodborne prove this, but you need to design the boss's moveset around the mechanic, and not just throw 2 enemies that you think will fit together into a fight and pray. Let's hope the DLC adds more fights to last week's video topic, and not this week's. Thank you all for watching another video. Which gimmick bosses are your least favorite in the Soulsborne series? Let me know down below, and be sure to parry that subscribe button to stay up to date on my latest videos every Wednesday and every Saturday. My socials are on screen now, feel free to follow where you feel comfortable. I recommend my Twitter and my Blue Sky. A massive shout out to my patrons over on Patreon. Thank you for supporting me for another month, you guys are awesome. And I will see you guys next time for another video. Adios!